Hi everybody, Nick Ravelis here, and welcome to the San Diego Opera Podcast. Now here's something interesting about the Pirates of Penzance that you may not know. This Gilbert and Sullivan opera had not one, not two, but three opening nights. It's kind of a fun story that tells us a bit of something about the working habits of W.S. Gilbert and Arthur Sullivan. It's a little complicated, but stay with me. One of their biggest hits was HMS Pinafore, which premiered in 1874. It played for 571 performances, a number practically unheard of in those days. People clamored for the sheet music from the score, and the tunes of Pinafore were heard everywhere. It especially caught on in the United States, and because at the time there was no international copyright agreement, scads of unauthorized productions popped up all over this country. At one point, 8 different New York theaters were producing the show within a 5-block area simultaneously. America was in the throes of a Gilbert and Sullivan craze. Of course, the creators were livid. Over 50 productions of Pinafore were scattered throughout the entire United States, and none of the profits were finding their way into their pockets. So Gilbert, Sullivan, their producer Richard D'Oyley Carte, and a hand-picked cast for Pinafore traveled to New York. There, in the Fifth Avenue Theater, HMS Pinafore began its run in December 1879. Now, let's back up just a bit. Before leaving London, they'd already begun to write their next work, which was to be, of course, Pirates. Their plan was crazy. Perform HMS Pinafore at the Fifth Avenue Theater in New York at night, and spend the days dragging the poor cast through the new work, rehearsals of Pirates. A grueling schedule, if you ask me, but the company was used to that kind of work. Gilbert finished the libretto, and Sullivan had completed almost all of Act 1 and was working on Act 2 when they left for New York. Now, the reason for traveling to this country was not simply because they wanted to cash in on the Pinafore craze, but to establish a U.S. copyright on the new opera, Pirates. That way, they'd have a chance of being protected and they'd get a little cash. But, you may ask, how were they to establish their copyright for England if Pirates was going to be premiered in New York? Well, they arranged for the tiny 40-seat Bijou Theatre in Paynton, Devon, to be the location of the British premiere that would take place a day or two before the New York premiere. This performance would be performed by an authorized D'Oyley Carte company that was already in the area performing Pinafore at another theater just a couple of miles away. Back to New York. No sooner had the ship docked and Sullivan had unpacked his bags, he realized to his horror that he'd left his manuscript score of Act 1 back in London. And because there wasn't enough time to ship it to New York for the premiere, he had to recreate the entirety of Act 1 from memory. Now, the two authors were used to working quickly and making last-minute changes all the time, but nothing like this had ever occurred in their working relationship. Essentially, Sullivan spent the entire month of December recreating Act 1 and writing Act 2 afresh, often keeping him up till the wee hours of the morning. He completed the score of Pirates of Penzance on December 28th, 1879, 7 o'clock in the morning of the dress rehearsal, and 2 days before the New York premiere. In the meantime, the poor company back in Devon, England, had the complete libretto and a few sketchy notes that the composer had left them before leaving the country. That was it. And of course, they had performances of Pinafore every night. The cast of that England premiere got one rehearsal. And by all accounts, it was a rather shaky affair. The singers all carried their music on stage with them, the ladies wore their Pinafore costumes, and the men playing Pirates were denoted by the wearing of scarves around their heads. Some of the music had to be made up by the singers on the spot, because there simply wasn't much of a score. But on New Year's Eve 1879, back in New York, the very professional premiere of Pirates of Penzance came off extremely well and was, like Pinafore before it, a huge hit. The London premiere of Pirates was on April 3rd, 1880, a few months after the New York premiere, and it played for almost exactly a year to April 2nd, 1881, 363 performances. The critics, both in New York and London, were pleased with the piece, calling it the most operatic of Sullivan's partnership with Gilbert. In fact, it was considered so operatic that the musicians in New York threatened to strike if they didn't get extra pay for playing such an opera-like score. When Sullivan suggested that because back in London it wasn't yet opera season and the orchestra from Covent Garden would be happy to come to New York and play Pirates simply for expenses, the players backed off. This was, of course, a ridiculous ruse, but it worked. So, 3 premieres and a very complicated schedule of events for Gilbert and Sullivan and their cast to finally be able to cash in on the American audience. Now, I have a real treasure here. This is a first edition of The Pirates of Penzance, published by the New York firm of J.M. Stoddard and Company, 1880. It just happened to be in our score library here at the Opera, unfortunately rebound, but the original cover had probably deteriorated years ago. As soon as I opened it, I saw this stern copyright warning from the authors at the bottom of the title page, warning against the use of any unauthorized versions. Wonderful. I'm Nick Ravellis, and I'll see you at the Opera.